Yo boys, welcome in. DDB here, and today we're going to be having a look at what melee specs are looking fun in the Warvin. So first I'd like to say I've done a lot of testing on the beta and had a good look at what most of the specs are feeling like, etc. So I'll give you my personal opinion on what's looking good and what's not looking so good. So they're going to be ranking the specs in 5 sections you see on the screen, which will be from the top to the bottom. So first it will be avoid this spin spec, which obviously you can tell would be just straight up avoid it. It's rubbish in my opinion. Maybe I'll try, which, maybe it's not too good, but maybe it's worth giving a little go. Maybe you'll like it, but probably not. We've got give it a go, which is obviously just give it a go. Fun spec, which I generally think is good, and you should play it. And then must play, which is 100% you should be playing this spec as it feels really good at the moment. We aren't really looking at how much damage the spec's doing, rather things like how good it feels to press the spells, so things like cooldowns, going into your cooldowns, how well it feels, and just other general buttons that you'd be pressing. You've got their rotations and how fluid the class is, which kind of ties into rotations. So with that out of the way, let's get down to it. So first up, we're going to have a look at the warrior specs, and the first thing we're looking at is arms warrior. Arms, I would say, is feel pretty similar to how it plays on previous seasons, with the big hitters coming from things like your mortal strikes and executes. Arms has always been very execute heavy, where when they can hit a target that's below 35%, just wail on it with executes and weave in your mortal strikes, it's going to be feeling very good. It makes you feel very aggressive in how you're going to be melting whatever you're hitting. Also, you have a fair amount of damage helping you from things like your bleeds you'll be playing, so these are things like deep wounds, rend, and thunderous roars. You also have talents that will help buff these even more though. The hero talents are Slayer and Colossus, where Slayer will be more focused around your executes and your blade storms. Colossus will focus on a new button that you gain called Demolish, and it does exactly what it's called. It will demolish whatever you're hitting, making Arms Warrior feel once again like an absolute beast, especially when you pair things like your cooldowns with this, like Colossus Smash. The downside I seem to Arms, outside of Execute and Mortal Strike, is generally weak spenders, with Slam being what you would press to dump your rage. Previously, you'd be able to spend your rage on things like Ignore Pain, but they removed this sort of like cheesy playstyle a while back. But even so, I currently would put Arms in the fun spec category. Furor is up next, and similar to Arms, it feels like you're pretty much just running down what is in front of you. With builders like Bloodthirst paired with certain talents will make this thing hit as hard as your spenders, which will come from things like a Rampage. Fury only really has a few buttons, which will mainly be your Bloodthirst, Raging Blow, and your Rampage. Other abilities you'll be pressing, but not as often, will be things like your Execute and your Whirlwind. Fury has always been known as this like carpal tunnel kind of spec, where you always be pressing buttons at a very fast pace. So if you do enjoy that, this is definitely the type of spec for you. Paired with cooldowns like your Recklessness, Odin's Fury, etc. The hero talents will be Slayer and Mountain Thay. Once again, Slayer will be more focused on your executes and your blade storms, whilst Mountain Thay will be focusing on your thunderclap ability and also giving some of your other abilities a chance to proc a lightning strike onto your targets. One thing you have to be very careful of, however, is Fury's very front loading, meaning you can start doing the damage instantly you run into a pack. That's with things like obviously an M+, for example. So you should be very careful of this generally. If you blow your load the instant like the tank pulls, you'll be doing pretty much so much damage that you're just going to instantly aggro everything and be dead on the floor. So this spec does sort of like you need a bit of control when you're playing it, as like I say, if you press your cooldowns as soon as the tank pulls, you'll be dead, and then you'll pretty much just be crying on the floor. Obviously, some tanks are going to be better than others as well, so the time that you'll be pressing your cooldowns will be different from tank to tank. But generally, yeah, you do want to kind of just hold your cooldowns for a little bit before you start like just smashing everything to pieces. But generally, I'd put this in fun specs once again, along with arms. So yeah. Now let's take a look at the Ret Paladin. Now Ret Paladin is a spec where you have damage fairly often with their cooldowns, with your things like Wake of Ashes and the main cooldown, which will be your Wings, which will have every minute. So the spec doesn't really suffer from not having cooldowns as other specs might. Your main abilities are going to be things like a Judgment, Blade of Justice, and Crusader Strike for gaining Holy Power. Most people though will opt into Crusading Strikes talent, which will turn your Crusader Strike into a passive. So like buff your auto attacks, and then your attacks will deal extra damage and have a chance to generate Holy Power. Your main spenders are going to be things like your Final Verdicts and your Divine Storms. This spec's all about your like building and spending as efficiently as possible. It's due to the fact that if you don't manage your spenders correctly and your builders, it can lead to like these long periods of downtime. Whilst you'll not be pressing buttons, and not pressing buttons is never fun. Execute will help out with this though, as you'll be gaining an extra button called Hammer of Wrath, which will be a new builder. Paladin, ever since the end of Dragonflight Season 1, has always been a very popular pick as it got its like a big rework during then. Yeah, just a lot of people have been playing it inside raiding and M+. This is due to how just fluid it feels generally. Having cooldowns very often, just making it very popular in general. Also, contributing factor would be just it's fairly easy to play, to be honest. They can also be very support focused, as they can off-heal with things like their Ward of Glories and their Lay of Hands, and also give their teammates damage reduction with Hand of Sacrifice. So all round, it's a pretty good pick. It doesn't just do damage, it also helps out the team as well. The Irritants in the War Within are going to be the Herald of the Sun and Templar, with Herald being more passive damage focused. Templar will give you an extra ability called Hammer of Light, which will be a hard hitting spell that you can pair with your cooldowns for extra burst. Overall, though, for most people, I'd say definitely give this a go. And it's probably generally in a fun spec category for most people. For me personally, I don't get like the rise out of it as much as most specs, so I'm going to be putting it into give a go tier. So let's take a look next at the Survival Hunter. So this spec's definitely seen some ups and downs for its time, with it mostly being downs in the past. It definitely did have its own moment in Shadowlands where it became an absolute powerhouse with its bombs doing a nutty amount of damage. And I'm happy to say, as it stands, they're looking very promising once again. Most of their damage is once again coming from their bombs and their Mongoose Bite, and they can also spec now Explosive Shot, which is just going to be like big AoE burst damage. They can either run a 2-minute cooldown, or a talent that will turn their 2-minute into a 1-minute cooldown, so similar to Ret, it feels like they have the cooldowns fairly often. The one thing I see people complain about the spec a lot is the tip of the spear, which you gain from pressing things like a kill command, and it will buff your other abilities. So you'll pair this with other hard-hitting spenders like your bombs, explosive shots, mongoose bites, etc. So it sort of ends up with this playstyle where you want to be either building a bunch of tip of the spear stacks, then unleashing your spenders, or be pressing things like your kill command into a spender, kill command, spender, etc. But personally I don't mind this as I feel like it adds extra skill to the class, and I definitely prefer harder classes and specs, but I can definitely see where people are coming from with this. Especially in like AoE, you'll be pressing a lot of bombs with this, along with your butchery talent. It'll just like reduce the cooldown of your bombs even more. So it just sort of feels like you're just constantly throwing out damage, and you're constantly able to sustain a lot of damage on AoE pulls. And then obviously from single target point of view, you're just pressing more mongoose bites, which again I don't mind as this is also a talent, and it'll sort of stack up to 5 times and doesn't refresh the actual duration upon gaining another stack. So it also again adds like another skill element to it. So for me personally, I'm going to have to put this in must play, as I'm just absolutely loving this spec currently on the beta. So yeah, definitely give this a go, even if you don't want to like absolute min-max it as much as possible, as this spec definitely does have a lot of min-maxing to it. I can 100% guarantee you that you'll have a blast on it. Next, we look at the rogue specs, and first up we have Outlaw. Now, Outlaw is a spec that will function around you rolling for buffs gained from Roll the Bones. Some of these buffs, however, are going to be better than others, so you're going to be trying to fish for certain buffs that you want. Currently, True Bearing is going to be the best one for this, and the most sought after, as it gives you extra cooldown reduction on top of your Restless Blades, which makes your finishers reduce the cooldown of your rogue skills by 1 second per combo point. This will lead you to high uptime on your major cooldowns like your Adrenaline Rush and your Killing Spree. Higher Adrenaline Rush uptime will make you just feel like a smoother gameplay, and due to this giving you extra energy regen and increasing your attack speed. Your builders for this spec are going to be Sinister Strike, Pistol Shot, mainly Pistol Shot you're going to be using with procs however, and your spenders will be Dispatch and Between the Eyes. The spec can feel very fluid as long as you get the correct buffs, but because of this it's also very highly RNG heavy, with its combo point generation sometimes feeling very random, alongside like getting shafted by not getting the buffs that you want from Roll the Bones despite you pressing it continuously over and over again. For these reasons, I'm going to be putting Outlaw in the meh. Maybe I'll try a tier. However, if you do enjoy the RNG side of this and your spec feeling like different based on what like buffs you have, then yeah, go for it. So Assassination Rogue is next on the table. So this spec will be all about your bleed damage, applying your bleeds and your poison to your targets to deal damage. It's a very low APM spec, which means you won't be able to press buttons that often. This is due to most of your damage coming from your dots, however. Spec has two major cooldowns, which one being will be Kingsbane and the other Deathmark. Kingsbane will be a spell that you press every minute and you want to squeeze as much damage inside of the window as possible. As with each ability you press, having a chance to apply extra poisons to your Kingsbane. The other cooldown, which is Deathmark, which I mentioned, will mark a target, duplicating your bleeds and poisons on the target, making this a perfect for Kingsbane. You also pair things like Shiver this to increase its damage even further. So if this spec, you're just wanting to be playing your bleeds, which will be your Garrote and your Rupture, while spending with Mutilate and spending with Envenoms. Envenoms will increase your poison application chance by 30% as long as the buff stays active, and the buff gaining the timer, so like 5 seconds, will be based on how many combo points you've actually spent for the Envenom. So then you end up with a playstyle of putting your dots up, building your combo points, spending with your Envenom. You build back up again and you sort of wait till the last seconds, couple of seconds, and then you'll press Envenom again to keep the buff up. At the moment, with such low haste though, the APM, like I say, is very low, lower than usual. So yeah, this is mainly due to just the energy regeneration rate, as it's just currently not there. It doesn't go up enough for you to be constantly spamming abilities. I'm going to be putting this spec into Give It a Go tier, as I really enjoyed playing it last season, despite the APM not being that high, generally being low, but it can be quite a chill spec to be honest. And when you pair this with things like Bloodlust, which will increase your APM even more, this spec can definitely pump and it just definitely feels a lot better. So next up, we're going to have a look at Sub Rogue. Sub alongside other rogue specs were changed in the last season of Dragonflight, with Sub gaining a lot more changes than the others to be honest. So with this spec, you're mainly going to be wanting to pair all your cooldowns together to do like monstrous amounts of damage. You'll also be having a talent that will focus around your Vanish talents, which reduce your cooldown of these even further, and it will help you burst even often. The major cooldowns for this spec are going to be your things like your Shadow Dance, your Flag, and your Shadow Blades. Shadow Dance will use a lot more often though than the other two because every time you spend combo points it will decrease its cooldown. Flag is a 1.5 minute cooldown, but you'll generally be wanting to pair this with a 2-minute cooldown of your Shadow Blades. Like I said before though, you can reduce the cooldowns even further with talent that you'll take. It will reduce all your rogue cooldown abilities by around 30 seconds. So the spec's like balanced around it doing a lot of damage inside of cooldowns and being like a bit more flat outside its cooldowns. You can generally fit in like 1 to 2 Shadow Dances outside of your major cooldowns, however, so it still gives it that like little oomph to it. Another ability that we're using like once per Shadow Dance is your Sacred Technique, which will do like a lot of single target damage and AoE damage. We also want to pair this cooldown with your things like your Symbols of Death, which is like a little cooldown you'll press every 25 to 30 seconds, and it will give you like a small bump in energy and increase your crit chance. Also, be pairing this with Cold Blood, allowing whatever button you're pressing next to be a 100% crit chance. So your secret technique just hits like a truck. So I think for Sub Rogue, I'm going to put this in fun specs, as again, with Rogue, I played it quite a lot last season and really enjoyed it. I definitely feel like it has a lot of skill to it though, as like the cooldown reduction from Vanish, you kind of have to play around that. But you do feel like an absolute monster where you're in cooldowns. Next, we're going to take a look at Enhancement Shaman. Now, this is one spec that was supposed to get like a massive overhaul in the Warvin, and did get some changes, but not as much as they really needed. The spec's going to be very high APM with you spamming your builders and spenders a lot. There'll be some times where like RNG can shaft you, however, and you'll be like having dry moments for it, if you're very unlucky. So you're mainly going to be generating Maelstrom weapon with most of your builders, and that's going to buff your next Lightning Bolt, Elemental Blast, depending on how many stacks it's got, with it going up to 10 times. There's going to be two builds with Enhancement Shaman. One of them is going to be more based on like your fire damage with your Lava Lash, and the other one's going to be more based around like your lightning damage with your Storm Strikes. You will be using both regardless, however, so it will just kind of like change the priority system depending on what build you're running. So, and also depending on what build like you prefer playing maybe. The Storm Strike build kind of like has a chance to reset your own cooldown on Storm Strike when you're pressing it, which can like continuously lead to like these loops of you pressing it and pressing it and pressing it a lot, which does feel good for it constantly to come off. But like I say, it does add that RNG factor to it sometimes where you'll press it and then you're kind of having to wait for it to come back off cooldown and then press it again, and maybe you're not getting getting the luck, so there can be that. And then for like the lava build, it's similar to the RNG for the lightning, but not as bad, where you have a chance to gain something called Hot Hand, which will reduce the cooldown of your lava lash by 60%. So this ends up you like looping lava lash into another ability into a lava lash for like a good 8 seconds, and the hot hand can kind of like proc off again, so you can continuously do that for a while, which does lead into the RNG factor. But yeah, for your major cooldown, you're just going to have your wolves, which will buff you and deal damage, and then they'll also be up a lot more often due to them gaining CDR on your other abilities pressed. Like I said before, it's a very high PM spec with the flow feeling very streamlined. The big spikes mainly come from your things like Elemental Blast paired with maximum stacks of your Maelstrom weapon, which would be 10, which makes just Enhancement Shaman a very good high priority damage dealer. With their AoE, Crash Lightning feels good to press and sometimes almost makes it feel like they have too much to press, so it's kind of like a good and bad thing at the same time. I also still feel like the enhancement needed a lot more changing than what was promised, but yeah, it is what it is. So because of this, I'm probably going to be putting this into meh, maybe I'll try. I will say it's kind of bordering onto the avoid this bin spec, but it does have some ups to it, so I won't put it there. Now let's take a look at Windwalker Monk. So Windwalker Monk has probably had the most changes out of all the specs in the War within, with things like actually scaling with haste now, moving from you almost never wanting a point in haste to you wanting pretty much as much haste as you can get. It's still going to function similarly how to it did before, with Rising Sun Kicks and your Fist of Fury being the core of your gameplay, but you also want to weave in things like a Blackout Kick, especially with high stacks of Teaching in the Monastery, and then we're also gaining Welling Dragon Punch back, which we haven't seen for a good while, and personally, I love the ability. They did remove Serenity, however, from the talent section, so you always have to run with Storm Earth and Fire now, but they did make it feel a lot better where while you're in Storm Earth and Fire, we're spending a lot less chi on your major abilities, meaning less Tiger Palms and more Rising Sun Kicks and Fist of Furies. If you enjoy very front-loaded classes like Windwalker, it's another great option for you, as Storm Earth and Fire paired with things like Zuen giving you a mini Bloodlust feels exceptionally great. And then when you pair this with like things like actual Bloodlust, you're just smashing whatever the target you're hitting continuously with Rising Sun Kicks and Fist of Fury because you have so much haste. Our new hero talents, which is going to be Conduit of Celestials, making us like even more front loaded, which will make us summon extra Celestials and give us a new ability called Celestial Conduit. It's just like deals like a bunch of burst damage around you depending on how many targets there are. It'll deal like extra damage, but even on single target, this is hitting like an absolute truck. For me personally, this is just like a no-brainer. Like I have to put this in must play. I personally love the new rework, with the only one thing that I would change is giving us an extra spender, as they did remove Chi Burst giving Chi, and Expel Harm's now baked in and it no longer gives Chi. Now we're going to be looking at Feral Druid. So Feral is going to be fairly similar to how it worked before. We're putting up your dodge, which will be your rip and rake, and then Moonfire depending if you took the talent for it or not. And then you're going to be spending with your Ferocious Spites, which will be the large sum of your damage breakdown. There was another spec that feels great inside its cooldown, which is Berserk, which will give you extra combo points, meaning more bites. Which, like I said before, most of your damage comes from your bites. And then you've got Convoke the Spirit, which will allow you to cast a bunch of Druid spells at your target. Usually take the 1 minute version of this, so every minute you feel like very bursty. You also have talents that will make your dots feel more impactful, with them dealing more damage, or them dealing damage faster but expiring quicker, which leads to you picking them up a lot more often. For the War Within, I do like one of the new hero talents which is added, which is Druid of the Claw, which makes it so your auto attacks have a chance to turn your next Ferocious Bite into a spell called Ravage, which will turn your bite into a buffed version of itself, dealing more damage. Also turning it into an AoE, allowing it to cleave targets in front of you, which just further plays into Ferocious Bite, dealing even more damage compared to what it even was before. The spec can feel slow sometimes, with you having to put up dots often and not biting as much, or maybe you don't get clear cast procs, which will allow you to press your builders for free. But overall, I think it's pretty good. I'd still love to move into like a playstyle before where Rip's dealing the majority of your damage, but that hasn't been the thing for a while, unfortunately. Overall, it's pretty good. A lot of people don't really play this spec as much, and haven't for a long time. I'm not sure if it's due to it having the stigma like in Warlords of Draenor, where it was a very hard spec to play, but it's not really the case anymore. It's like it's not easy, but it's not hard, nowhere near as hard as it was. So I would definitely give this a go, and I'm going to put this into the fun spec tier. Now we have Demon Hunter. So Demon Hunter got a lot of changes going in the last season of Dragonflight. A lot of the new talents synergized well with the last tier set as well. It allowed your Blade Dance to throw your Throw Glaive for free on its own. So then you would obviously spec into the Throw Glaive talents because of this. Now on the War Within, they don't have the tier set, so taking the Throw Glaive talents is a lot harder, especially on single target. You're pretty much never running on single target. Now you're kind of having to throw points into other things that just aren't as impactful, to be honest. Demon Hunter has two builds that you would mainly look at, which are being the standard inertia playstyle, which you'll be fell rushing around a bunch and gaining extra damage because of this. And then the other build would be like a no mover, where you just don't have to fell rush around, and instead you just play like with your normal abilities. So it's going to be pretty similar to how it was before, with like fairly high APM, spending of Fury on Blade Dances, Cow Strikes, and then your Demon Blades will be passively gaining you Fury. And then you've also got your Fell Blade on top of that to help you with that. Your main cooldown again is Meta, which will turn you into a demon, transform your Cow Strike and Blade Dance, and giving them like a buffed versions of themselves. The spec can be fairly bursty while it's inside cooldowns, paired with things like Essence Break, and on AoE it's going to be things like Emulation Aura, doing the majority of your damage. But again, Jesus hold the wheel with this, as when you run a talent called Fire Inside, giving you a chance to refund an Emulation Aura on charge, like you could just either have no procs, or you could just be walking around with Immolation Auras, just smashing everything. For the hero talents, I would say they're mostly bland, unfortunately, with Reaver giving you a buff for a glaive every so often, and then Felscar giving you an emphasis on being in your demon form. So a lot of people actually do play Demon Hunter, whether or not it's because it's easy or it's just one of them classes in Legion they added that was kind of cool and it's kind of stuck since, I don't know. But I'll probably have to just put this into meh, maybe I'll try. Personally, I do like Demon Hunter, but it just hasn't been enough changed, and the current old ones that they did in Dragonflight with the changes just don't really do anything for it currently. It kind of just makes it worse, if anything. So yeah. So last but not least, it's going to be the Death Knight specs. First up is Unholy. Now Unholy actually got a lot of change on its tree going into the War Within, with it being like a lot more flexible with what you want to do depending on the content. It's going to be doing a lot more damage with its disease than it did before, and then also it's got new talents which will turn its army, which was a 3 minute cooldown, and they've given it a point after that, which will turn it into a 1.5 minute army. I'm pretty sure this talent was in PvP, as it's called Raise Abomination. But yeah, so like I said before, diseases are going to be dealing a large portion of our damage now, alongside our pets, which will be summoning more of them. Like I said, we've got 1.5 minute army, we've got 45-second apocalypse, and then you've got choice node for Gargoyle, or something that's looking currently even better, which allow you to summon an extra Magus of the Dead when you consume your sudden death procs, which you do get fairly often, so you have, yeah, just even more things up. For AoE, they even have a new talent called Festering Scythe, which hit targets in front of you, infecting them with wounds. That just means your wounds are going to be dealing even more damage when you're popping them. The hero talents are fairly passive, but I do like the Riders of the Apocalypse one, which ties into us even having more pets up, as you'll be summoning even more with these. Like, you'll just be summoning, like, as I said, Riders of the Apocalypse, so it'll be summoning, like, a bunch of extra Death Knights to help you. And then the one that I actually really like in this is one of the nodes, which is, will give you a Death Charger in combat, similar to how Paladin Horse works, but this one lasts 10 seconds instead. So DKs are no longer going to be the wheelchair spec that they're currently portrayed as. So for Unholy, how it currently feels and everything, I think I'm just going to put it in fun spec. I will say it's probably pretty close to must play, um, but I don't think it's there just yet. Now our last spec of all the melees is going to be Frosty K. Frosty K has gotten a lot of sizable changes going into the War Within, and still has a few builds it can run, with it either being the one-handers or the two-hander build. The one-hander spec you primarily run with Capstone Breath of Syndragos talent. This was a talent before that you'd have a 2 minute cooldown on, you would just kind of keep up as much as possible, and towards the end of the expansion people would end up kind of like chaining breaths back to back, as you just had so much runic power generation. From what I've seen so far, you aren't actually going to be able to do that, nowhere near as much generation as you had before. So yeah, chaining's kind of out of the question. I think that you personally either love or hate breath, since you have to spend all of your runic power trying to keep it up. And if you do kind of like get a mechanic where you need to move out, you know there's a good chance it's going to drop and you're just pretty much going to be big sad, unfortunately. The other build is going to be the two-hander build, which focuses on big hits from your obliterate. Similar to before, the two-handers are a lot easier than the one-hander breath spec. You pretty much just press obliterate, especially with killing machine procs, frost strikes to get back runes, and then howling blast when you've got rhyme procs. So it's primarily only 3 buttons. Most of your damage does come inside your Pillar of Frost windows though, allowing you to get a bunch more killing machine procs from your things like your rhymes and your frost strikes. They did get a few extra talents which will just deal extra damage for them, not really having to do anything. So yeah, for them it's just kind of like free damage that's happening. And then for the hero talents again, they do have Riders of the Apocalypse, which I noted before in the Unholy DK section, which just gives them a bunch of like extra passive like DKs that will kind of run out, and then they'll get like a charger, again similar to the Paladin one, but it's just better. Me personally, I don't really like the one-hander frost build, but I don't mind the two-hander playstyle as much. There is also a one-hander build that I've seen the people playing that doesn't actually run breath, so for me personally, it's probably more enjoyable. But overall, I'll put Frost in the give it a go tier. Yeah, guys, this is where I think I rank specs depending on how fun they are in the war within. So I didn't end up actually putting anything, like saying, to avoid this bin spec, but if I had to put anything into it, it probably would be enhancement. But yeah, I don't think it's that bad just yet. Yeah, if you guys like enjoy any of these specs, you maybe think they could be higher, then let me know your opinion on them. I'll probably be making a ranged version of this later on, so yeah, stay tuned for that. Other than that, make sure you like, comment, and subscribe, and I'll catch you in the next one. Peace.